So good morning, everybody. Good to see you. It's raining here. I'm based in Wailuku. When I work from home, I don't know how your weather is over there. Winnie, how's it on Oahu?
It's nice and sunny. Sorry to say that.
Hey, Kahului, Brooke, how is the weather over in Hawaii?
It's really nice. Oh, sorry, she just started the car. No, it's really nice. It's sunny. It was rainy yesterday, so I'm happy for the sun.
So today, it's good that other people have sunny weather. Although I have like my rainy days, but today we're going to focus on project design and activities. So I find this is what's probably easiest for you to write, but it needs to be tied to all the other pieces. So with that, we're going to do a little review. What are some of the important points for those of you that were here last time? What are some of the important points that we touched on, or what stood out to you? A budget. So what are some key budget points? When might you start working on your budget? At the end?
Well, we want to start as soon, I guess, in the beginning of the project. This way we kind of have an idea of how much money we are asking for, and then we can plan our activities around that. At the same time, it's good to know how much we may be able to get in the bank before we plan all the activities.
Stuart, was there more you're going to add to that?
Well, I just looked at some of your slide there. So I wrote down, it's the financial story of your proposal. So it's basically the blueprint of what your proposal is supposed to be. And I wrote down, reveals planning and feasibility for the project. So it's really an outline or a structure for what your project is going to look like. So it's critical and got to pay a lot of attention to it in the beginning stages to plan for how your project is going to unfold.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that one of the things I shared is like when I review someone else's project, I look at the budget, and the budget tells me exactly what you are going to do. So that frames my reading of your project. And I'm sure a lot of reviewers do the same thing. Like when you were talking about, you should do it in the beginning to know how much money you're going to get. And also if it's feasible to do the project even, right? We might have a project like, oh, $20,000. But then when you start thinking about what you want to do, you're like, oh, that's not going to last far. Maybe it's not worth my time. You know, it depends on what you're doing. If 20, you know, but it's good to do your budget. So I like to do it before I plan my activities because it helps me know my numbers, right? If I start writing and thinking I'm going to serve 1,000 students before I do my budget, but then do my budget and like, oh, I can only serve 250, then you have to go back and scale back and change everything in your activities, and you might miss something. So I like to do my budget early on, so then I know that's feasible and I know what kinds of numbers that I'm working with and what I can and can't do as far as staffing. So it helps. So to bring something back even further, is the objectives and outcomes. And we're going to do a little review of that real quick too, because the activities are strongly tied to that. So you want your proposal to be this tight story that evolves around one thread. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about that. Just do a recap of the parts of the proposal. Okay, so Parts of the proposal, the first part is the need statement, the problem statement. So this is your marketing. This makes your reader buy in. They're like, oh my gosh, we have to do something about this. So your need section is probably something that you might spend most of your time on as you write it, because you really want them to feel like there's a pressing need to do something and address this problem. Or if you're doing the research, same thing, that this research is really needed. So your goals, objectives, and outcomes are what your funder is buying. You need to set the time on this too, that they're realistic, so they're tied to your need. That sets the baseline, and also tied to what you're going to do to solve the problem. The plan of action is what you're going to do to achieve those goals, objectives, and outcomes. And if you're talking about like a research project, your goals, objectives, and outcomes, some research projects, some NSF proposals require you to have objectives and outcomes, some don't, but your research questions would be in lieu of sometimes objectives. Other typical parts is who's going to be on it, so your project personnel. Institutional resources is about, do you have capacity to lift off and launch this project? Evaluation, which we'll be talking about next time, that's also tightly tied to your goals and objectives and outcomes. Showing how do we know you met those objectives and outcomes that you stated. Dissemination is how you're going to tell people, how you're going to spread the word about your proposal. And then the budget, which we talked about last time, which a lot of times is separate as a budget narrative, and then project abstract. So there's going to be like a summary. So those are kind of typical parts of a proposal. So as I said, we're going to quickly review goals, objectives, and outcomes, because it's really tied to the activities. So we even took it one step further. We talked about your vision. So Gary's on this call. He talked about the bright, shining world that will occur, the perfect world, right? So your vision, this big statement, big idea of what you hope to do. Well, that's a small piece of. And then your objectives is the steps that you're going to take. Oh, your goal is what you're focusing on. So that's the focus of the project. Your objectives are steps to take that, achieve that goal. And there's process objectives, which are, we tend to want to stay away from these in your proposal, but they're basically outputs of their actions. Like, I will hold 10 workshops. 100 students will go through the workshop. That's a process objective. They're more like outputs. You want to tend to stay away from them if you can, unless the funder requires that. And then outcome objectives are the results impact, what's going to be achieved. Like 75% of attendees are going to apply for a grant. Whatever your outcome is generally more of a percentage. So the goals, as I said, big pictures, that's the foundation, simple statements, only 1 to 3 per project, maybe just one goal generally, and all your objectives can decide that goal. Depends on the project. And sometimes they tell you what your goals should be, your objectives should be, or how many you should have, but not too many goals. So the process objectives, which we talked about, are more like activities, what you'll do, actions and activities. And outcome objectives, that's what your funder is buying. Those are the outcomes. Tells the difference your project will make, its results, impact, and benefit. Why is it important? It tells us what you will do. The goals, objectives, and outcomes is your project, addresses your project focus and what specifically you intend to achieve or change. And like we said before, this is what your funder is buying, and be realistic to support the baseline data if possible. So baseline data will tell you kind of how much you want to achieve. And then they should be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, related to goals, and time bound. So I just went through this fast as a review because we've covered that already. But just to talk about it, because it flows, you need your objectives. You need to think about your objectives in order to think about your activities. So then we get to the plan of action. Why is it important? It details your plan. It says specifically what you're going to do. This section addresses exactly what we've done within the project. So it's kind of the heart. is what you know already, because this is probably what you think about. This is what I'm going to do. If I have a project, this is what I want to have it be about, right? But really you need all these other things to frame it. But yes, this is kind of what might come easiest for you to write when you're first starting. The specific actions you'll take to achieve the objectives and aligns with objectives. So you don't want your activities to be any activity. You want to align each activity to the objective and how it will achieve your objectives. You also want to include the reason you chose this approach over other approaches. So why are you doing peer mentoring instead of faculty advising or faculty mentoring? You want to have evidence about why you chose the activities that you chose. And it should always say who's going to carry out each activity. So that's going to be really specific. It could include timelines, task charts, and logic models. And that depends on the solicitation, what it asks you. So I generally include them when it's asked. It could include data collection, but that could also be in your evaluation section, like who's going to collect the data, but it might touch on surveys go out or that data is collected at a certain time in the year. So let's give an example of how they're tied to the objectives. So this is from an NSF project that had to have goals and objectives, and they kind of laid out what the goals are. So my goal here is increase educational outcomes for low income, including Native Hawaiian students. So I have my objectives 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D. So 2A, 40 students will participate in Kahuba'a scholars over the course of the project. Is that a process objective or an outcome objective? Outcome is the guess of it. Outcome. So an outcome is what will be achieved. The output is what's going to happen. So I guess like it seems like that's going to be something that's achieved, right? But if I would say what's going to happen with them participating in the scholars program, we're hoping that it's going to increase persistence and graduation rates and transfer rates. So really participating in the program is an output. So it's a process objective. So 40 students will participate as Kahuba'a scholars over the course of the project is a process objective. Why I did it? Because the program really focuses on how many students will participate. So that's why I put it in there. So baseline and evidence, this is just here because this particular solicitation asked for it up front. So that's why there's a table and this baseline is here. But it's actually pretty nice because it makes it really easy to see. So there's some baseline data. We're not going to talk about it for 2A, but then the planned activities. So number one, recruitment and selection, and 2, the program will enter 12 new students per year and replaces as needed for students not retained. So it kind of gives this basic activities of how I'm going to achieve objective 2A. So if you look at objective 2B, 83% of program scholars will be retained fall to fall each year. So that makes sense. That's something that we track, we're interested in at institutions of higher education is fall to fall persistence, right? So that's an outcome objective. So retaining students is something that we're hoping to achieve. That's leaving things in a better place. Participation in the project doesn't necessarily have an impact directly. That's an activity. So 48 students participate in the project. That's kind of an activity. That's a process objective. 83% of students will be retained fall to fall. That's an outcome. That's a positive impact that we're hoping to make by participation in the project. So the baseline evidence for the 2B, saying when this was written, 57% of UHMC and 58% of YC students were retained fall to fall. So now we have baseline data. 83% is really high, but we're working with like 12 students a year. So hopefully we can achieve this. And then number 3, 4, 5, 6 are talking about the activities that we're going to do to achieve that. So in this project, monthly faculty and peer mentoring, number 3, number 4, faculty follow-up on early alert, 5, preventative measures to target GPA, and then 6, CAL model, cultural integration and protective factors. So that's what we're going to do to increase persistence. 2C, 50% of program CALs will earn an associate or bachelor's degree by project end. The baseline data and the evidence. So we have 29% of UHMC and YE students earned a 2-year degree. So we're increasing that quite a bit to 50%, but again, we have small numbers, so hopefully it'll be an intensive program services. So then 7, 8, and 9, 10 say what we're going to do to hopefully achieve 2C. And then 2D, 33% of scholars will transfer to remain in a 4-year STEM degree program. And then the baseline data on that, 11% is UHMC and 10% for YCC students transfer. And then 11, 12, and 13 say what we're going to do to achieve those goals. So you see, this is really tightly aligned. The story we're telling gives us what our outcomes are going to be, or our objectives are going to be, and then baseline data, how we're making the decision on what that number is, and then the activities we're going to do to achieve that. Does anybody have any questions about that or comments?
No, that makes sense. I got that wrong, Melissa. Actually, if I had just read the goal at the very top when you asked the question, I would have said, nope, that is part of the process.
Nope, that makes sense. So would I always use a chart like this? No. The solicitation specifically asked for this chart, but is it a good chart? Yes. I think this is a really good way to tie your activities. So when you're talking about your activities, some way or another, you need to tie it back to your objectives. Sometimes I do it in text. If I'm writing a section in text that talks about my activities, like I'm talking about recruitment and selection, and then in parentheses, I might put related to objective 2A. Or I might talk about faculty and peer mentoring in my narrative, right? And then I'm gonna put in parentheses related to objective 2B. So I'm tying it together. I'm not just doing an activity because it sounds good. I'm doing an activity because it logically will help me achieve my objectives. And you also have to tell them how it's going to achieve your objectives. Don't let them wonder if it is or not. Say it's going to help me achieve my objectives because the faculty are going to closely monitor the students and help them with advising to be on track to transfer or whatever that is. So you tell them why it's going to help you meet your objectives. Here's another example. So this was the other one is NSF. This is a USDA project. So in the solicitation, we had to have a leadership program. So the solicitation said, I mean, everything was kind of open, but it said, you must have a student leadership program. So made it a goal, right? We're going to build this leadership program with a focus on Native Hawaiian leaders to promote water quality and conservation through community extension education. So because they said we had to do it, I turned it into a goal. And then there's objectives. So there's 1A, how many students and how much would be Native Hawaiian. So that's more of a process objective, but then I have the planned activities. So why does this chart look different? It's because what the solicitation asked for. The solicitation asked, align your objectives to your long-term goals and your activities. So there it is. That's why long-term goals are in the middle instead of baseline, because it's what the solicitation asked for. So you have to read your headers really carefully and read what they ask for. But same kind of concept though, objectives and then activities. So 1B talks about how many community presentations going to happen, and then the impact. 75% of attendees will indicate intent to change behavior. And then you'll find activities 3, 4 support how that's going to happen. And then 1C, 75% of student leaders report additional leadership activities. And then number 5 and 6 for planned activity support, how this could be achieved. So will you always have a chart like this? No, but it kind of helps you think about, like, this should be a really tight story. You shouldn't have go down lots of different tangents, right? Stay on track. Activities directly relate to objectives and what you're going to achieve. And that's why you don't want to have too many objectives. I'd say the projects I'm showing you probably have too many objectives, but sometimes the projects dictate that. So if we have an objective, so we want to say 50% of students will earn a 2-year degree within 3 years. What kind of related activities might we do?
Wouldn't we have to do assessments as far as what level they might be at now, and to develop some sort of academic readiness for them, depending if you are meeting them at their senior year of high school, or I'm so sorry, or their freshman. Oh, clearly, I cannot multitask. Does that make sense? So you'd have to get some sort of assessment of where they are so that you can move them, if it works for them academically, into the AA or the AS degree.
Right, so some kind of individual needs assessment and individual educational planning could be part of your project activities to help them achieve it. What else might we do to help them graduate within 3 years?
Did I see something about examining their grade point averages? You sort of analyze their grade point averages since it correlates with completing a degree?
Yes, like, I was gonna say, like some kind of system to track their progress.
Yeah, so monitoring their GPA, having what GPA they need to achieve to graduate, and or if they want to transfer into programs. So monitoring the GPA. I see in the comments tutoring, right? So maybe tutoring if their GPA dips down. What else might you do to help them graduate?
There needs to be things that tie them to the campus. For example, a job on campus or something like that, that helps them feel included, but also keeps them here, because it's much harder to get your homework done at home than it is on campus.
Yeah, so connections to campus, having a group or place or space on campus to be, either through student support groups or through organizations or through a student job. There's a lot of research around sense of belonging. Advising, yes, mentoring, career planning, workshops, all of those things, group activities, student clubs. So any of these things or all of these things might be included in this, right? But how do we choose, and how do we know they'll work? How do you know this planning? We all have this sense of what will work, right? But how do we know and convince the reviewer that they will work?
You have to measure something. So you would suggest to track it and see how many actually earn a 2-year degree within 3 years.
Yeah.
That's measurable.
Look back at former graduates to see what their timetable was of the same profile.
Yeah, look back at past graduates to see what factors might relate to student success. And we've done some of that. Like Paul Carlifoni had done a bunch of research on success factors. Valma, can you say more on research on student academic success?
Well, I guess with the history of the research, then you can kind of post some data on perhaps ways to promote student success? Because I know in some of the research, right, there's like 10 or 11 components that make up student success, right? Like sense of belonging, the economic, I mean, not economics, but academics and all that stuff. So I think you got to identify what makes student success. And then probably from there, you can kind of align things that would meet those factors.
Definitely. So I think there's some larger general research, right? I think it was Cabrera, some had like these factors of success that had to do with sense of belonging, high school GPA, taking algebra 2, social engagement, and so forth, right? But then we also can look at our own institution. And then of course, we're going to be tracking the success and evaluating the success of the project that we're doing, right? So when you're writing your grant, you want to use evidence-based activities to the extent possible. So I think all of those things that we mentioned, looking at institutional research of past graduates, if we know what works for who, as well as looking to the research literature. Because the funder and sponsor really wants to know you're going to achieve the outcomes or objectives. Even if you're doing like a research project, you need to do research. You need to do a literature review on what's been done and what's the next step. So, and then if you're doing a project, education and training, or trying to help students perform better, you need to look at what has been shown to achieve your objectives. So not just what has been shown. Sometimes I see people do like support their objectives, like, oh, this has been shown to improve GPA. GPA is one of your objectives, right? So then you need another piece of research linking GPA to graduation if that's your objective. So you want your research to have relevant outcomes to your objectives. So when possible, use evidence-based or research-based approaches that lead to your objective outcomes. So try to match them up. Try to find one or two. You don't have to have for everything you do, but there should be some connection to what you're doing and what research has shown to achieve those objectives. And search research literature. So I do a lot of using our access to our library for like EBSCO, host, or whatever types of literature reviews. Each federal department seems to have their own clearinghouse. So like the Department of Education, they have What Works Clearinghouse. I spelled that wrong, but U.S. Department of Labor has CLEAR, which stands for something, but CLEAR is their database of research articles. And then like the Health and Human Services has the Pathway Clearinghouse. I could have cited more, but you can look for them too. So sometimes, a lot of times for Department of Education grants, which we write, they'll say, we want you to find articles from the What Works Clearinghouse, and even if they don't, and same with the U.S. Department of Labor, which is another type of grant that we go for. I wonder if USDA has the same. I know even NSF has a lot of times different grant programs have their own website and their own organization that publishes relevant research articles from past projects. So you bet I'm going to use some of those if I'm going to need evidence-based practice that's from my program or from the federal program or the grant writing program. If they have a database of their research articles, I'm going to highlight some of them. And that leads us to logic models, because a lot of times your evidence-based practices are going to show up in the activities of your logic models. Sometimes people are scared of logic models, but they can be really straightforward. And a lot of times your funder will give you an example of how they want it to look. And I always copy their example. So if they show me an example of a logic model, you bet my logic model is going to look exactly the way theirs is, just with my own ideas. So my logic model is very based on the grant and the samples they give me. But kind of the basic concept is input. So that's what you have. And that includes the money, the federal money or the grant money that you're going to get, plus yourself, plus staff and institutional resources, plus the activities that you're going to do is going to equal the output. So outputs are the products, participants, workshops, the activities you'll, or what, like how many workshops will you have? How many students will participate? And the objectives, the outcomes, like 75% will persist year to year of students, or 50% will graduate within 3 years. So that's kind of the basic concept of logic models. I'll give you a few examples that we can look at. Here's a simple one. I've had this one as a sample for some Department of Education logic models. I like it because it's simple. But first column is input. So if you look at our inputs, we have the federal funds, we have institutional facility, staff, and resources, student needs data. So basically that's, we know what we're going to fix. We have the program staff, we have community partners, target schools. For here, I put research-based activities because that was a highlight of this or key point of this solicitation. So academic advising is the first thing. The second one, info on funding college and financial literature education. So I put a source there because by having financial literacy education has been tied to going to college. Connection to resources and mentoring. Check and connect, which is something from the What Works Clearinghouse. So I'm really identifying and pulling out the What Works Clearinghouse. It was a program that we're going to follow to that was shown to have on graduation and summer testing campaign. So that's again from the What Works Clearinghouse too. Then that's been shown to increase college enrollment and mentoring college career exploration. So those are my activities. My outputs are what's going to happen, who's going to participate. So 500 students participate in or receive advising and mentoring. 500 participants receive info on college funding and financial literacy education yearly. So if you go down, not all my students participate in everything. Like 150 participants are part of Check and Connect. 500 participants are invited to college and career days. So and that's how many students are going to participate in each activity. And I have short-term outcomes. So like increase in GPA, being on track for high school graduation. I have my intermediate, which are in this one, they're all my objectives with the percentages. And then my long-term is kind of the bigger picture of what's going to change. And then this is assumptions, contextual factors. So there's some assumptions I'm making, like successful rigorous high school completion and financial literacy will lead to college persistence and degree attainment. That'd be somewhere I put like higher GPA. An assumption I might have that higher GPAs will lead to college enrollment and persistence in college. So there might be assumptions like that I might want to put in there. Is there any questions about this logic model?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Could you, as far as formative and summative evaluation, what would be a good way to approach that? I mean, like, I kind of want to know what the difference in approaching it, I guess.
That's a good question. This is on here again because it was required to be on here. But we'll talk about it more in evaluation. Okay. So, but formative is the benchmarks that you know that you're on your way to achieving your final objective. So formative might be, let's see. So in my example for 50% of students are going to graduate in 3 years, right? What are some things along the way that you know that you're on track?
Okay. I guess catching the retention and, you're tracking, your semester tracking, you can tell if they're on track, right?
Right. So you're tracking the credits that they accumulate, you're tracking their persistence.
Yeah.
Right. So that's formative evaluation. And you can make adjustments in your formative evaluation to achieve your objectives. Oh no, we lost 25% of our students the first year. I don't know if we're going to get to 75%. You make an adjustment in your programming where you're calling all those students who stopped out, finding out their barriers and helping them get back in, right? So your formative evaluation are ways that you can make adjustments. And then your summative evaluation is done. You achieved it or you didn't achieve it. That's the end of your program. So like in our 50% of students who graduate within 3 years, at the end of 3 years, we're done. We achieved it or we didn't achieve it.
Okay.
So possibly in this example, the summative evaluation might be over the intermediate and long term. Actually, I mean, this is the example that the Department of Education gave us, right? So I used it, but now when we're talking through that, really my intermediate goals are really summative in this logic model. That would make it more correct. I mean, sometimes we write grants, we do the best we can in the time frame we have, and then when we have opportunity to reflect, we're like, this is how I could have done it better. And my work was always, there's always room for improvement. So that helped me see like, oh yeah, the intermediate is really, for the most part, kind of formative, but, or kind of summative, but good question. We'll talk about that all more in evaluation. Okay, now this logic model looks way different. Why does it look way different? Because this is the sample they gave me. Right? So this is just to show you that there's no one logic model that you'll use. You know, if I've given a choice, kind of like the simple model. Simple, I like it. But this was from the US Department of Labor. This is what you're gonna use. So you can see in the middle, there's step one, problem or issue. So the problem or issues stated there about the first point about high unemployment. And the second this was about cesspool replacement, developing careers in cesspool replacement and the need for that. So then step two, community needs assessment. So the first bullet point has to do with that the COVID-19 pandemic increases. We have a need for more jobs that are recession resilient. And the second bullet point, we need to protect wise, valuable resources and water resources. Then if you go over to step 3 on the right side, desired results. So this talks about all our objectives. So you see this little 2A, 2B, 3A, 3B on the side. These are the objectives that are required. So why are they all more like outputs? Because that's what the solicitation asks for. Step 4, influential factors. So these are some things that might impact that. One of them is legislature, that all the cesspools need to be replaced by 2050. Step 5, strategies. So these are my activities. These are the things I'm going to do. And then step 6, assumptions. So then there's some assumptions. So there's always assumptions that we make about why this is going to work. So like step 6 is saying this joint effort between industry and education and workforce development partners is going to help achieve success. And second one, increased employer engagement strengthens the career pathways. So there's assumptions built into our activities that they will work. And so sometimes in a logic model, you address them. So any questions about this type of logic model? And I mostly put it in here just to show you they can be way different. One more example. This is a USDA. Why does it look like this? It looks like this because this is the sample they gave. It looks exactly like the sample they gave me. Okay, so that just shows you if they give you any samples, just recreate it with your own text. So this one has situation, which is basically the problem. This is about water treatment. So situation, limited water resources, basically declining marine health. So input, same thing. So faculty, chancellor, our facilities, activities, what we're going to do. So this is like one of the objectives that we looked at with the Water Warriors, the leadership program, community extension presentations, outputs, like this is like 20 students are going to participate in it, 10 public outreach. So these are the outputs. And then the outcomes. So here in this logic model, what they wanted and what they asked, and also what we had to write about as their outcomes was the knowledge that's going to be gained, the actions that is going to occur because of this project, and the conditions. So knowledge, we're basically increasing knowledge and awareness about the conditions and how to make it change. actions we're making leaders, and creating positive conservation behaviors, and conditions is preservation of Maui's water resources. So totally different type of logic model, but just to know that these types of things are out there and you just follow what they ask. Any questions about logic models?
So it's really, Melissa, this is Leifua. So is this logic model more like the bullet point versus the conversation of the things that have to happen to get to the outcomes?
Yeah. So the logic model summarizes your project. And the reason we're talking about this with project design is because it's helpful to this logic model before you think about everything you're going to do. Right? It helps you streamline. So we're talking about streamlining your whole project. So you have the need, you have your objectives and outcomes, and you have what you're going to do about it. And so then what you're going to do, your activities and your outputs of those activities is going to logically lead to your outcomes. So it's nice to think like, I'm trying to think of an example. If you say, we're going to stick to the 50% of students graduating in 3 years. If you say, I am going to give all the students a Ka'au model in the classes, and that's going to talk about, I'm explaining this a certain way for a reason, but it's going to be about a Hawaiian legend of Maui and his journey, and students are going to relate to that. So if I just say this, and I think this is a really good idea, and I go out on this tangent and I explain it in detail, my reviewer is going to say, what? How does that relate to student graduation? I don't get it, right? But through the logic model, through the evidence-based practice, you're going to say it develops their purpose, and research shows that developing the student's purpose helps them graduate. It helps create a sense of belonging and community among their students. That's one of the aspects of focus, and the research shows that helps students persist and graduate. Has to do with developing cultural identity, and that has been proven to increase student success, which we're making the assumption increasing student success will lead them to graduation, right? It's also based on, there's some aspects that align to Tinto's model of student development and attrition with leaving college, and this idea of creating connections to college. So now all of a sudden in our discussion of our project, we're aligning these things to our objectives and outcomes. So you want to think through this. You might not have to make a logic model to streamline your project, but you want to make sure your activities logically relate to what you're gonna achieve. Does that kind of make sense?
Oh my gosh, this is so perfect. I'm so excited. I know I don't know these people and I must sound crazy, but Melissa, we just created a curriculum this summer, and we are taking, 80 total students, but we are introducing the Ka'au method to my freshmen in high school with the help of Auntie Hokulani and with the professor on the Big Island to make it work for their age group now, for that very purpose of setting the groundwork for college strengths and preparing for a successful high school journey to lead toward the college journey. And we've worked in an IS 103 class to balance that between the cultural learning and the journey of knowing who you are, where you've been, and where you're going with the academic. Okay, I feel so much better about all the work we've done so far.
Yeah, and that makes, you have to tie in why you're doing what you're doing, and how your theory on how it's going to work. And hopefully you can support your theory with some evidence and research literature. Not just saying, I'm going to do this programming. Leihua, I'm going to pick on you for a second.
Oh no, I was afraid of that.
So Lehua told me we're going to go to the lavender farm. We're going to take our students to lavender farm. She has a pre-college program. But that's great. Okay, so tell me how this relates to your objectives. Right? It's right, Lehua, that was my first.
I remember I went, what?
It's all good, but how does this relate to your objectives? And she told me, well, we're going to do some career explorations. We're going to talk about some history to help develop cultural identity. We're going to do some labor and work and have these discussions about being involved in the community. Having community service helps you be more like that's part of a college application process, especially something that you keep up. So she explained to me like different ways that this relates. So I think that's the case. You don't just do something because it sounds like a good idea. You do something because it relates to your objectives.
Yeah, yeah. And there was literacy as well. Classroom was held up on the mountain of country. And when we left, 2 of the students who were at that point just in the 8th grade were invited that when they were older to do internships, both at the lavender farm, and one of the farmers has a protea farm up country. So it was quite advantageous to gain that confidence for the student to want to do things outdoors. So yeah, but I didn't know the logic when I made the suggestion, but I got there.
We all have these assumptions why we're doing what we're doing, right? So we think this is a good idea for these students, this population, whatever I'm working with. This is a good idea because I think it'll work, right? Because you have assumptions about why it'll work, but you have to logically tie it back to your objectives or what you're trying to achieve. Even in a research project, so now I'm going to pick on Chad. even in a research project, say you're like, so Chad's focus, and I might get this wrong, so please forgive me, Chad, but his focus is on developing physics literacy in kindergarten teachers for their students, to create more scientists and have the teachers not afraid of the science and therefore pass this love of science onto the children, very young children. So the assumption there is that whatever activities he's doing is going to make these changes. And the assumptions there, giving the teacher skills and tools and a love of science, maybe love is stretching it, but giving the teacher skills and tools and confidence is going to pass along to the students. So that's an assumption. And then if it's a research project, you still have to align logically how this is going to work, past research that shows that this has promise, and how this is new and innovative. So the logic model applies, and this project design applies if you're doing a research project or if you're doing an education and training project. Okay, so some projects have required services like Europe, Talent Search, some education and training. Even the USDA project, which really was a research project, said you have to have this leadership program in it, right? So if this is applicable to you, that says you must do this, and even in some NSF projects I've seen, like maybe not required services, but required reaches, like you have to include underrepresented populations, or you need to include technology, whatever it is. So if your grant has required services, make a chart or bullet point, the list to show that how you're addressing each. Even though you've given some text, you want to make sure your reviewer doesn't miss it. And if there's only a few, I bold it or highlight it. So here's an example, like a chart. Okay, here's the required mandatory services on the left, the connections to high quality academic tutoring services to complete secondary, post-secondary courses. This is for like a talent search program. And then I'm saying how I'm addressing that at each grade level. And then number 2, advice and assistance in secondary and if applicable, initial post-secondary course selection, and then how I'm going to address it. So if you have mandatory services, like even Stuart on our Department of Energy grant, there was mandatory things we had to touch base on. So some kind of chart could have shown could have succinctly shown how we are addressing each mandatory service. I get to pick on everybody today, almost. Or call everybody out. So timelines and milestones are commonly asked for. So you just have to read your solicitation and see what this says. So make sure to include when, by who, what, and how it relates to your objectives. The what could also be your milestone. So key benchmarks that show you are making progress. And then read closely. If they ask you for timeline, they're going to say what they want in the timeline. So your timeline, just like the logic model vary, your timeline might vary. Here's some examples. So, and I think, if they don't ask for it, some kind of simple timeline is nice to have them picture what you're doing when and what time. So there's something like this from the USDA grant. So it says when, so on the left hand time, I broke it down by like semesters. So when, the activity is the middle, and then in parentheses are related objectives. So you should always have your activities relate to objectives. So here I'm saying what activities I'm addressing and then who's going to do it. So the lead is who is going to do those activities. So I think I might even make this chart better if I had more time and room. I might make a column that says objectives and just write them in instead of putting them in parentheses. But this has all the elements.
Melissa, I have a question. Oh, as far as the lead, do you specify the individual or do you just indicate the position that is going to take care of it?
I tend to, this one has some of both, but I more recently just do the position.
Okay.
So this one project had key personnel, key faculty. So they're listed in here, but I probably could have just said co-PIs, but some of them aren't co-PIs.
Some of them are teaching, just faculty, right?
Yeah, well, they're all key personnel, but there's like on this project, there's a PI, which is a principal investigator, there's co-principal investigators, and then there's key personnel that are just instructors on this thing. But I think I tend to stay away from people more so now, so I might just put instructors or co-PI and instructors or something like that for leading this. Okay, so I have another example. Why does this look different? It looks different because what was asked for is different. So this is an NSF grant. The focus isn't the objectives, but they ask for the milestones. So they ask for, right here in the top of the heading, a work plan with major milestones for key project tasks. So I'm going to put major milestones as one of the column headers and project tasks as one of the column headers. So it's what they asked for. So I have the month, I have the project task, the lead, and the milestones. And this is just what was asked for. I give you one more example. This one. So this is what they asked for. In the figure 5, HANA career pathways, timeline with activities, milestones, and responsible leads. So this is what I gave them. I broke it out by goals and objectives because it was the easiest way to do it. I think there was some other text that you had to address all the goals and objectives. The easiest way, I broke it out by goals and objectives. So for example, year 1/October, establish statewide system for awarding, recording, reporting micro-credentials. That's what we're doing. That's the activity. Lead, PI, milestones, public open data format for interoperability. So it's just what this asks. So each one says the milestones and the lead because that's what was asked for. So basically, all these things, the logic model, aligning your activities to objectives and outcomes, timelines, are really showing your reviewer what you're doing, when you're doing it, who is doing it. So they're all tools to that end. You'll have narrative text of what you're doing too, but these things will help streamline it. So don't go down on all these different directions. Stick to what's most important. So by the end of this section, your reviewer should have a clear picture of how you're going to achieve your objectives. So the activities, methods, project design, whatever this section is called, it might have different names, but your whole key point is that you're telling them not just what you're going to do. Reframe that. You're telling them how exactly you're going to achieve your objectives. Tables are helpful. Logic models can help guide your design and keep you on track of what's most important. And always answer how it relates to your objectives, who will do it, and when it will be done. So is there any questions about this section?
I have one question. Generally, when it comes to the tables, would the reviewer already have a required template that is acceptable in that particular grant? Or is it more on our side, the people that are working the grant, that we have to develop those?
Usually we have to develop them. I mean, a lot of time, more so than not, they give examples of logic models and I copy them, whatever that is. But the other thing, there's normally not a template. Here and there, they'll give you a template, but normally there's not a template and you need to make the template, make your own template. But I usually like use keywords as column headers. Like I did in the examples I showed. So if it says like milestones, then the milestone is a header. If it said, like this one, the milestones, they said milestones and key project tasks. So then I made sure those were my headers. This one, it was supposed to be activities and related objectives. So I made that my headers, right? So it just kind of varies on what your solicitation asks for. But I think in a basic timeline, you want when, what, who, and how it relates to your objectives.
Mahalo, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Okay, well now I have something fun for you. Relatively fun, but fun for a Friday morning, maybe. This is the worksheet I sent out. It looks like this. Can everybody see the worksheet now?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, so let me just get on my PowerPoint. So I made a little worksheet activity for everybody to go through. I will divide you up in two and work through this. So you can use your own objective or the objective that I gave you in case you don't have an objective to use. Think through the activity you might do to achieve this goal. So just one simple objective, not multiple objectives. What evidence do you have that these will achieve the intended result? So you aren't going to get your evidence right now this morning, but just ideas of where to get that evidence. And then I have a simple logic model. Now, logic models are not tables. I've been told that. We have the TIG, who is an organization that reviews our grant proposals, and they've told me logic models aren't tables, but this table will help you fill out the columns because generally there's like supposed to be arrows between them, but and there's supposed to be figures. But this is a table that will kind of help you just make a logic model for that one objective. Do you have any questions about that? Okay, so I'm just going to randomly break out to 2 breakout rooms and then just a little bit. Here we go. Maybe like 10 minutes or so. And I'll hop into both groups in a few minutes.
Swapping, but they went out of business because it was too difficult to implement. So consequently, it's kind of gone back to a different model for charging, although Tesla also had a battery swapping idea. And that was the idea, that it could be faster, but technically it was a lot more challenging to do that than to do the type of charging that's done now.
So welcome back, everyone. Please share just a couple of highlights of your discussions and your thoughts on project design.
Key piece is, it comes back to what is the sponsor looking for. So the design has to be around like what the requirements are, or what the specifics of the sponsor's intention is.
That's very true. We've had the conversation, like, you still can have your project and you can go through these activities, but sometimes you have to change the lens that you're presenting your project in to meet the sponsor's demand. It's just like if you're applying for a job, you might strategize and rearrange your resume for each different job. Like you might qualify for multiple positions, but you would just highlight your experience and express your experience in different ways. And it's the same with grants, right? Your project might be expressed in different ways depending on the funder and what the funder is looking for. Other thoughts? Did anybody get through working through the logic model for one objective?
This is Brooke. We decided that this is a lot more difficult than we had anticipated. Just like the whole just the whole grant writing thing. But we did get through to the evidence, like we named one activity, and then we realized that for the evidence part, you were talking about doing a literature review. So we would probably do that there, but we did not get to the logic model. But I did have a question. So these mini lessons ends on May 14th. And I was just wondering what happens after when we have no idea what we're doing.
You can come ask me if you, so my thought was, okay, so the initial ones that were more, you're the hanger honors, right? Initial ones were heavily geared to minimally what I feel like someone needs to come work with me, like finding the solicitation and the funding opportunity. I'm not generally going to search for your opportunity or have time, because I'm generally just working on what I've been assigned. Also, like developing your concept. And then the objectives and the budget helps, that you were finding some of that. But then when I was doing this presentation, like we're in the weeds, not the weeds, but we're in the tiny little details, or starting to get in details. But the more that you can have your project designed together and started. So these workshops are kind of designed to give you a start where I can more easily work with you. If someone comes to me and says, I have this project idea where I want to make comic books out of traditional Hawaiian legends, I'm gonna be great. Can you find some funding sources, or what did you have in mind? And I might have it in the back of my head if something comes along, but I'm not going to be searching for it. But if you start searching for and find this opportunity and start to refine your concept, and then, I will work with you. Maybe this group can continue working. I don't know. Initially, I had thought about just Friday meetings of people who are working on grants, but I don't know if people are actually working on grants. So I've just kind of kept going with the mini lessons. But I'm available to help you out. We have a Title III grant where we're supposed to increase the grant writing and extramural awards of not only UHMC College, but also Hawaii CC. It's connected to establishing the shared service center, so ESC, the Extramural Service Center, and the OEP, Office of Extramural Programs. So we can't sustain them. The whole concept of them, and the reason we can grant fund them is if they're going to bring in more awards. So
Nice.
I'm available to you, but also once you get started, I can connect you with TIG, the implementation group that they can help review your proposals too. So that's
Okay.
is now that I have this more developed, maybe I'll do it once a year, maybe I'll do it once a semester and people can come. Maybe it'll evolve. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
What you all want to do.
Yeah, no, I totally need help with this. It's just like blowing my mind how much, like, you know, it's not just like your idea is cool, but it's like you have to, like, all the verbiage is amazing. Like, you know what I mean? You're just tossing out all these words and these verbiages, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what I mean. But it's like I had no idea what it was before, you know?
Yeah, and I think you learn through doing. I think part of it is just to find one that you want to go for and do it.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
So I know some people are working on proposals. So if there's interest in just keeping a Friday, pop in with questions, and like Stuart made a comment when I jumped in his group, like I've taken over the whole session, but that possibly could be what this group does. I mean, if there was a meeting group and someone's working on a proposal, like here's my ideas, help me refine it. Could be a thing. And I'm always working on something. So I'm like, here's my ideas, help me refine it. Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Coming or want to come, but we'll see.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap up?
Well, I have to say mahalo. You're not getting out of this without me saying thank you. Are you crazy, woman? For you to even bring this group together is magical in and of itself. And I don't know where we'd be without your energy and your expertise. So mahalo big time. And I agree with Brooke that there's some way to continue. I think your goal of having us get some our first grants going will be met, and then you can use us as evidence when you do this again at the next juncture. So don't leave us hanging for the next movie. Hold us accountable to follow through, because it's only going to help us help the college or help ourselves and the individual programs that we'd like to spend some time to improve upon. So anyway.
I hope that this can lead to helping people write proposals. Like I said, the session today, I just wondered, and like we're kind of in the details of it that I haven't covered in this detail ever before, because this is just what I had proposed when I wrote down the topics. But I think it's all important things, but really once you get writing, it'll make more sense. So you have some ideas, but just to do it. So I think Wayne volunteered to help me in my current project. So, well, we'll see you all next week. We'll work on evaluations, so that we've started heading in that direction today, but evaluation kind of ties it together. So when we're talking about evidence-based practices, we're using practices that have promised to achieve our results based on past research, past performance, not our current project. So evaluation is looking at our objectives. So we're going to talk more about we touched on a little bit, formative, summative evaluation, quantitative, qualitative evaluation, research, having an evaluator, and what that all means. So that kind of brings it together again. Like we're just writing this really streamlined story: need, objective, what you're going to do to achieve the objective, and then how you're going to evaluate if you achieve that. So that's what you're like.
See you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.